back to Reclaiming My Mind. I'm your host, Jessica Vaughn. It's been a little while since we've had some guests on. We were recovering from the plethora of 2018 interviews that we did back to back. But we are super excited to have two guests for the very first time with us today who are going to talk to us about sustainable fashion and the effects of the fashion industry on the environment. Because even listening to like last night's debate on CNN, there was so much talk about different industries that affect climate change, but I didn't hear anything about fashion. And according to our guests, it's one of the second biggest contributors. So we're going to jump right into that. Let me introduce my guests first. In no particular order. I was going to do it alphabetically, but my brain can't work that fast. Rachel Karioki, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself and give us a little background about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Rachel Karioki, and I am founder and CEO of Court Bottoms, which is an eco-friendly athletic wear line based out of here at home, Tampa, Florida.
Yeah.
Right. So my background is actually in foreign policy and international development. I did that for about 10 years overseas and recently decided to start a new chapter. And was introduced to the challenges that fashion is creating for the environment and communities along the supply chain once I saw the movie The True Cost, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point in this conversation. It was very eye-opening, and it really changed my perspective on how I wanted to leave things a little better than how I found them. And so I launched this eco-friendly athletic wear line, and I have been loving every minute of it. But the other thing that I really enjoy about the work that I'm doing now is just talking to everyday folks about how they can shift their consumer habits and their fashion choices to be more thoughtful and to make sure that we're mitigating our negative impacts on the planet.
Nice. And then, not to leave you a second, we have Taryn Hipwell, correct?
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about you, Taryn.
Sure. My name is Taryn Hipwell, and I am the CEO of Beyond the Label, and I'm also an author of a book called How to Shop for Shifts.
Wow.
And I have to extra make sure that the F comes out because it doesn't usually. But that's the whole thing. The play on words is something that I like to do, which is adding humor to educate about really dark subjects. And as you mentioned, fashion is arguably the second most toxic industry. There's another very focused, I don't know how to explain it. Essentially, there are 5 top horrible industries, and fashion is sometimes listed as the 5th. However, it contributes to all of the top 5. So it's interesting because it does contribute to agriculture, to transportation, to oil.
Right.
And a lot of people don't even think about the fact that their yoga pants are made from petroleum byproducts, which is also contributing to oil industry. So that's something where I get to bring up fun stuff like that. Yay.
So it seems like you guys are partnering together to help educate locally and then hopefully even further reaching than that, especially if you're writing books, about this issue. How did you two connect?
Well, there is a international organization called Fashion Revolution. This organization was founded after a tragic incident happened in 2013 in Bangladesh, where a garment factory collapsed and over 1,000 garment workers were killed. Thousands more were injured. After that incident happened, several fashion insiders came together and said that they were going to take on part of the responsibility to make sure that the fashion industry was being responsible in how clothes are being produced. This particular factory was producing garments from big brands that all of us here at home have in our closets. But really, those brands were outsourcing the responsibilities of the conditions of the factory. And so Fashion Revolution was born after that incident. Fashion Revolution is founded on the idea of increasing awareness about some of these issues, the environmental impacts, as well as the social justice impacts of the fashion industry. And so every year, there there's a Fashion Revolution Week where smaller grassroots organizers like ourselves come together and we start talking to community members about these very issues that we're talking about today on the podcast. And so Taryn and I were connected last year. We're both relatively new to Tampa, but both passionate about this issue. And so Fashion Revolution is what brought the two of us together.
And I've been doing events with Fashion Revolution since before Beyond the Label. So Beyond the Label used to be Eco Divas. We partnered with TEDxLA and became Beyond the Label. But when they did the very first Fashion Revolution week or day, it actually started as a day. It was amazing because Andrew Morgan hadn't quite finished the movie The True Cost. And it's a movie that shifts not just your thought of how manufacturing of fashion happens, but it kind of shifts more than that. And so one of the main things that Fashion Revolution does is they have people ask the question, who made my clothes? And with Beyond the Label, we decided to take a little bit more science-based, and we wanted to get people to think about what's in my tea so that we can cover both conversations, which are the ethical treatment of the humans that are making the clothes, as well as the chemicals that are going into the fabrics you're putting on your own body. And so that was something that was really amazing about this particular week in Tampa, because literally we didn't know each other until like 3 or 4 weeks before, and there were 3 other amazing women, and a woman from Colleen from Miami got the 5 of us together, and we each had different events and covered different subjects and got to educate to different audiences. And it was really amazing to see everybody come together for that week.
So was that something only happening local, or that was something national and then there was a local version of it?
It's been happening globally, and I believe it's 128 cities around the world, but I know that has to be more, because even recently I was on a call and there's now in Nebraska, in Arkansas, and Minnesota, and there's like smaller towns that are taking on this message. And even within the state of Florida, they have some things going down at the New College, over in Jacksonville, in Orlando. Orlando also has Veg Fest, and they have their own events. Miami had, I believe, like several events also. So where we had, I believe there was 4 events total. There was like probably 4 events that were happening in Miami also.
So let me stop you. When you say we, because there's a lot of organizations and acronyms being thrown out right now, and I'm trying to keep track. So we're talking about Fashion Revolution, right? Which was started. That is a global event.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You guys met at a local version of that global event.
Mm-hmm.
And that was how long ago?
April.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's recent. And that's a yearly event that happens every year?
Yeah, so 5 years ago was the first time when I was still in Los Angeles, and it was even pre Beyond the Label with Eco Divas. And then Beyond the Label also this year did an event in Los Angeles, along with multiple other people that were doing events in Los Angeles. So like the main city hubs like LA, New York, Miami, they have a series of events. It usually lasts a week long. Everybody comes together. It's pretty amazing. I went to the ones in New York the year before, and you get to meet like the top experts in the field. And so it really is this like coming together of the community. And that's why I was mentioning, like on this recent call, the fact that there are like much smaller towns or cities or places that you wouldn't typically think of having like this type of an event at the same level. But there really is like a bigger conversation that's starting. And I will say, like when I first got to Tampa, it was interesting because I was so used to being surrounded by people inside of the bubble of this conversation. So to ask people what they knew about sustainable fashion, and they're like, oh, I wear a lot of cotton. And I'm like, oh, nuts. I don't know how to have this conversation with you about conventional cotton yet because we just met. But yeah, let me get to know you, and then I'll tell you some stuff like in a little bit. Yeah, the fact that there are people that are hungry in Tampa to understand this information is pretty wonderful.
Awesome.
So we had 4 events last year during Fashion Revolution Week, which is in April every year. And we're already starting to plan our events for Fashion Revolution Week for next year. So definitely stay tuned. There will be events popping up.
Now, is there a website that people can go to that then they find a local chapter of that if people want to follow specifically the Fashion Revolution
Absolutely. They can Google Fashion Revolution and it will pop up with the global website. You can then break it down by country and then more specifically town or region. And then you can also join the Tampa Bay Fashion Revolution Facebook group. It's open to the public, and that's where we will be posting all of our local events that are going to be happening next April.
Okay, so that gives me some idea of how you guys met, but let's back it up and talk about, as you said, just the basics of the conversation and introducing people to the idea. So when we're talking about fashion sustainability, personally, I heard kind of like what you said as far as the process of making the clothes, right? The dyes and toxins and, all of the stuff that goes into that. And then the aspect of the social justice of who's manufacturing the clothes, what kind of conditions that is, how they're getting paid, and kind of the economic aspect of it. Is that a good way to kind of interpret it when you're talking about fashion sustainability? Or how would you break that down for people who are just hearing that word for the first time and trying to understand the concept of what that means? Rachel, let's start with you.
I think that is a good way to break it down. I think you can look at the environmental impacts when you talk about sustainable fashion, and then you can look at the health impacts when you talk about sustainable fashion. In addition, you can also dive into the social justice issues, as you mentioned, under that entire umbrella of sustainable fashion. And I think each one of the brands that are out there that are talking about this issue, they take a little bit of a different approach as far as their emphasis. But there are all sorts of areas regarding sustainability that we can be talking about in the fashion industry because it is so broad. It does touch so many of these different aspects when you look at the entire supply chain, starting from the pesticides that are on the plants, going to the dyes that are in the clothing and how those dyes are controlled. And then also looking at the waste on the end side of the product. When you start to think about the amount of waste that we're producing based upon our increase in our consumerism, it's really mind-boggling. One statistic that's out there is the average American throws away 80 pounds of clothing and textiles a year. So when you add that up across every American, that's a significant amount of textile waste that's going into our landfills. And as the fashion industry has progressed, we're not working with single fiber materials anymore. We're working with a lot of blends. And so when we say blends, think a polyester cotton blend shirt, or think about your athletic wear. You're working with spandex along with Lycra. All of these different blends combined together make it very difficult for those fabrics at the end of a garment's lifestyle to actually start to break down. And so a lot of these clothing that we get rid of, 80 pounds for each of us, sit in landfills for years and years. And so again, when you look across that entire supply chain, there are all different aspects of the industry that you can dive into when you're talking about sustainable fashion, whether it's environmental, social justice, or also the health component of it.
So, in the information that you guys had sent me, you both have maybe 3 key points that you had pointed out of how you start to broach the topic or that you're specifically passionate about when you're having these discussions or introducing it to a group of people. So, Taryn, why don't you kind of tell me what those are and the introduction? Because you were you both at the Environmental Caucus meeting, or was it you, Taryn? Okay. So why don't you tell me kind of how you introduced that and what those 3 topics or what you're passionate about when we're talking about sustainable fashion?
I typically start by getting people to just simply think about what is in their t-shirt. So if you can...
So you're saying t-shirt.
T-shirt,
okay.
yes.
Because before I thought you said something about tea, and I was thinking the drink, so t-shirt. Okay, think about specifically
what's in
your
my
t-shirt.
tea.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's funny because when I did What's in My Tea, I also kind of relate care labels with nutrition labels. And so I wanted people to think, if you're going to look at what is in your tea, you should be looking at what's in your tea. And so we
T-shirt,
actually do
tea.
make
Gotcha.
that play on words. And my nickname is T, so then there. Anyways, but even when we were at the Democratic Environmental Caucus, it was really interesting because it's a room full of people that know a lot about environmental issues, but not specific to fashion.
Sure.
So being able to relate the different industries that fashion has an effect on is a really good way to connect with people at where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when you start with a t-shirt, it's something where you can kind of like ask a couple questions, see what interests them. If there's somebody that really likes waste, you can start talking about recycled cotton t-shirts. If somebody is all about organic or vegetables or is in the agriculture part, you can talk about circular systems, which has a fabric part of their company called AgriLoop, which takes food waste and makes it into fibers and fabric. So it's just finding whatever that common conversation is with somebody that you're meeting for the first time, and then sharing something very innovative and unique. One of my favorite things is there is this jacket at FIDM in Los Angeles, and it's made from crushed glass.
Is that a store?
FIDM is Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising.
Okay.
So it's one of the two big fashion colleges there.
Gotcha.
And so when you take a picture of this particular jacket, the background goes black and the actual garment glows. And there's even, you could have people in the picture, it doesn't matter. Everything behind it goes away and the jacket actually glows. And it's pretty amazing. So when you get to share like new technologies or something that has never been seen before, even like biofabrics where there's bacteria that's made from wine or fabric that's made from bacteria from wine. And then you get to explain to people what that could be like in the future so that our clothes could disintegrate after they're done and more than just biodegrade. And so it's, just figuring out what the innovative thing is that would interest somebody.
So it sounds like, and I could be just guessing here, that for you, one of the passions and focuses are direct environmental impact, right? The impact that is it the waste of the clothes and as well as manufacturing the clothes can contribute to climate change.
I would say the main topic that Beyond the Label focuses on is the health impact of clothes, whether it's in the process of being grown, made, dyed, bleached, finishing agents, mordants to attach dyes, the after effect, where it goes, where clothes go when they are considered waste. And even one of the events that Fashion Revolution and Beyond the Label partnered with in Los Angeles was to do a river cleanup, and they found clothes in the river.
Right.
So what effect does that have to the water system? Because you have clothes that still have different kinds of chemicals in them in the river that is meant to be our drinking water in Los Angeles. So that's something that it does really cover everything and all the different ways that your health can be affected, or the health of a person through each step of the production process.
Right.
And even for myself, like working retail and actually having a hard time with the off-gassing from certain fabrics in certain stores. Like I know that—
Meaning the gas that's released from
the chemicals that are put into traditionally made fabric, especially like polyester and some of the dyes from polyester. And it's interesting because I know I'm different because I've always had agitations and issues with clothes ever since I was little. Like I still remember when I was younger and my sisters would get to have their school clothes bought at Kmart and they could walk out of the store in it. I had to wait 2 weeks for my mom to wash it before I got to wear it. Otherwise I would break out in hives. And I could only have my clothes washed with Tide because my body decided it was the least of all the evils. And if I wore somebody else's clothes home from school or at a sleepover, I would again get hives. And so I've just had so many reactions. And I know that most people don't have these reactions, but it doesn't mean that they're not ingesting different things through the pores in their skin.
Sure.
So I'm just more sensitive to it.
Right.
So
when you ask people what's in your t-shirt, how does that conversation go?
usually like—
Can we role play? Let's role play.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not wearing a t-shirt, but we'll pretend this is a t-shirt.
Okay.
I wear a lot of dresses.
Yeah. Well, okay. So have you ever looked at your care label?
Yes.
Okay. And what are some of the things that you've seen on your care label?
Washing instructions.
Okay.
And sizing. And yes, what the garment is made from.
Okay. And so when you look at the fabric content,
yes.
What are some of the fabrics that they list?
Cotton. For sure.
Okay.
Polyester, yes. I don't wear a lot of latex, so honestly, I'm not paying that much attention. So that's as far as I'm going to get with that.
Okay. So what's fun about being able to understand some of the new things that are out there is if you look for different kinds of fabric. There's this fabric called tencel, and it happens to be made from eucalyptus trees. And it's really soft. And when I say it's really soft, I mean people that wear it to bed and accidentally wear it the next day and then wear it to bed again because they don't want to take it off.
Right.
And so for me, sharing about eucalyptus fabric to somebody that likes wearing cotton, I get to share something with them that is new and interesting and exciting that they might not have known about. And it's also, to me, more hypoallergenic because you don't have some of the chemicals that are in traditional growing of conventional cotton. And if you want me to tell you about some of the chemicals that are in cotton, I'm happy to share with you. Or I can guide the conversation to, hey, there's also orange fabric.
Sure. So, yeah, what's wrong with cotton? I mean, I know what's wrong with cotton from its history of our country. But
right.
in the fabric itself, aside from the grotesque history, what's wrong with cotton these days?
The initial growing phase has pesticides in it, and the pesticides usually still are in the cotton even when it is processed into being a fiber. The fiber process also has another chemical to detach the fibers so that they can basically kind of grind it up into smaller particles to make it into the thread. And when they're making it into the thread, then there's the bleaching process because you typically have to get a clean one color so that you can go ahead to dye it. And when you do the dye process, there are mordants, which are heavy metals in the dyeing process of a traditional dye. Then there's the dye, which also might have polychemicals in it. And then when you're done getting the t-shirt made, it has a spray, which is a finishing agent to keep it from decomposing, which sometimes includes formaldehyde. And once you have all of those things, an unwashed t-shirt, especially, let's say for a volunteer organization that they only spent like $5 to $10 on it because they needed to have it be super cheap, you might be wearing something that's feeding your pores all of those chemicals.
How about after you wash it 15 times?
After you wash it 15 times, most of the chemicals do come out. And that's the crazy thing. I just a few years ago had an aha moment of why I was doing better with secondhand clothes than getting something from the store. And I was like, oh, it's probably because all I need to wash out at that point is the other person's detergent and body chemistry.
Right.
And then it's just whatever the fiber is.
Gotcha.
However, when it has a poly blend or it's a polyester, my body does not like polyester anymore, whether it's psychosomatic or not. And this is like the fun thing I shared with her. I'm like, it's so amazing listening to Rachel talk because she's so eloquent. And then I tell this story. So I was at a fancy party in Los Angeles and it was all VIP and everything. And I'm wearing this really beautiful dress that happens to have a poly lining. And I started kind of looking down and I have my armpit is leaking liquid, not like a little spits. I had drips of liquid coming off of my elbow because my body did not like having polyester.
Sweat?
It was sweat.
Okay.
Not a little. I mean, like yes, I'm not making this up. It was gross. And I had to like run to the bathroom and like take care of it. And I just was kind of beside myself because I had actually done a huge purge of my closet and I got rid of like 80% of the polyesters and I only kept a few pieces that were special. And that was one of the special pieces. And I don't wear it often, but yeah, anytime I do, it's the same reaction. It's like it knows that it's not supposed to be on my skin. And it's like, you know that this is a pretty looking item, but stop doing this to yourself. So Yeah.
Well, that's a lot to think about. Rachel, you've been so patient over there. Why don't you tell me a little bit in comparison or along with Taryn, what you feel passionate about when it comes to fashion sustainability and what, you kind of narrow in on when you're educating people about this topic?
So I really enjoy listening to Taryn talk about the health implications of the fashion industry and all the toxins, because that is something that I feel like every time she shares a story or some of her research that she's learned from writing her book or the years of working in this field, I always learn something new. But from my perspective, in the founding of Court Bottoms, we really looked more at the environmental impacts and then also the supply chain. So when I think about the environmental impacts of fashion, two things that I really hone in on when I'm talking to customers or just folks who are interested in learning more is the impacts on landfills. And so like we talked about before, the waste, the textile waste that's growing more and more. And then also the impacts on the water systems. And when I say water systems, first, sorry, I say water because I'm from the Mid-Atlantic. But the toxins and the dyes that Taryn talked about, those are obviously seeping into our waterways. And even if that's happening in a factory halfway across the world, it's interconnected. And so eventually this is going to touch our shores as well. Mm-hmm. So in addition to those toxins and dyes that are polluting the water systems, you also have the issue of microplastics that are polluting the water systems. And I think this is an issue that's near and dear to the hearts of us here in Florida. Sure. We really value our tourism industry and just our beautiful environment. I often tell people I get to live in paradise for the majority of the year. But it's all because we need to take care of it. We need to maintain it. So microplastics, the majority of microplastics in the water actually come from washing our clothes, washing synthetic clothing. So when you wash all of those polyester items that we all have, this is something you see a lot of in activewear in the sector of fashion that I'm involved in. You see a lot of polyester blends. Every time you wash them, you have microplastics that spin off in the washing machine and eventually make their way to our water systems. So there's a way that we can prevent that. There are a couple ways that we can mitigate the amount of microplastics that are getting into the water systems through what we're wearing. I would say one is we can wash our garments less often. And that's something that has come up more and more when we're talking about what individual consumers can do to make a difference in this area. We can think about how we're maintaining our clothing. So after you wear something and we end up throwing it into the laundry basket, does it actually need to be washed every single time we wear it? Or can we think twice and hang it back up and wear it a couple more times before we actually throw it in the washer? So that's one point. We can just wash our items a little less. The second point, I would say, is there are tools that have been developed to catch all of those microplastics when you're washing things. So there's something called the Guppy Friend. You can go online. I think it's about $30. It's just a washing bag where you can throw your synthetic clothing that's made out of synthetic materials into this washing bag, throw it in the washer with everything else, and then after you're done washing it, before you throw it in the dryer, you can actually look at the bottom of that Guppy Friend bag and scoop out the microplastics, because that bag will catch all of those microplastics before it goes into the water system.
And then you put it in the landfill.
Yeah, I suppose so. And then the third point that I would flag is we can think about what fibers we're purchasing in our clothing more and more. So as Taryn highlighted, there are things that are alternatives to synthetic materials. This is something that with Court Bottoms, we've done a lot of research to see what other fibers are out there that can give you the high performance characteristics that we all want in our athletic wear. Mm-hmm. But how can we get it through natural fibers versus synthetic materials?
And what research have you what have you concluded?
So with court bottoms, we've taken two approaches. So one, we use a bamboo blend for the majority of our items. With bamboo, there are pros and cons to every fabric that you're using out there. But with bamboo, it is moisture wicking, it is breathable, it's great when you're out in this Florida heat to keep you cool and keep you comfortable. However, there are certain components of our items, particularly our staple item, which is an athletic skirt, that you do need some semblance of polyester for part of the garment. And so with that, we actually use recycled polyester instead of original polyester. And so that's another avenue that a lot of smaller brands, but also larger brands are exploring. And when people think about recycled polyester, I think a lot of us, or at least I originally thought, this was taking old polyester fabric and breaking it down and reconstructing it. But there's actually this new technology that's out there where you take plastic water bottles and melt it down and reconstruct it into a material that is recycled polyester.
Interesting.
It is very interesting. And so that's been great. So when we have needed to use polyester in our items, we use recycled polyester. So although it is still a synthetic material, it's not creating a new synthetic material. It's using something that's already out there in existence, recycling it and reusing it into something that can be useful in everyday use.
So here's some questions I have. One, I'm a little confused because part of me wants to wash my clothes more to get the toxins out of them. And then part of me wants to wash them less to make sure I'm not contributing to plastic in our water. But we'll get back to that. Essentially, my question is this is all great information, but how does this relate to people who have to worry about how much money they're spending on their wardrobe, right? Because it's similar to me, like when we talk about organic foods versus, the non-organic option, that there's almost a level of privilege that comes with being able to buy that, to have those conversations, because there's so many communities where they don't have the privilege or the ability to spend extra money to make sure that their items and their clothing are either environmentally friendly or labor friendly or whatnot. So how do we address this movement of talking about fashion sustainability with including poverty-stricken or marginalized communities that don't necessarily have the privilege of being able to buy some of these alternative fabrics?
There's several answers to that. I mean, I know a lot of the people that we speak to Beyond the Label and Fashion Revolution wise are students, and they are also young professionals. And so I'm always looking for affordability first and foremost. Literally right now, there is a elongated, sale that's going on, 7 pairs of undies for $35, which is $5 a pair, which is the same of the 5 for $5, but you get 2 more for $5 as Victoria's Secret. And so they've made a cotton panty that looks like a Victoria's Secret that's made with organic fair trade cotton. And so that's one specific thing. But with this one company, Pact, they do have leggings for $20. They do have sales that they let their,
to me, leggings for $20 is still expensive.
Right.
So I guess what I'm wondering is an alternative in some of these communities to push towards recycling clothes that have already been made? Is that one of the solutions that we would be talking about? Even just in general, even if affordability isn't your issue per se, is one of the pieces of talking about fashion sustainability, reuse and rewear of clothes that have already been created?
Absolutely. So I would say one way that we can go about doing this is we can mend our clothes more. So if you get a rip in your jeans or if a button falls off, it doesn't mean that piece of clothing needs to go to the donation bin or it needs to be thrown away. That is a perfectly good item that you can mend it up. And if you need help knowing how to do those things, the Disco Dolls, which is a boutique here in Seminole Heights, they have quarterly sewing chats where you can come and they'll teach you how to mend your clothing. So mending is definitely something that in sustainable fashion, in Fashion Revolution, is a hot topic, because reducing the level of consumerism is a key to making sure that we're mitigating fashion's negative impacts on the planet. So 1 is mending things. 2, I would say secondhand shopping, thrift shopping. Those things are absolutely, they are a main contributor to, again, mitigating the negative impacts of fashion. We don't need to buy everything new. And I think within the sustainable fashion world, people are talking more and more about secondhand shopping being cool. That is sure. Something that now has more prestige than...
you wrote a whole song about it.
Oh, I feel like we're going to need to hear that later.
Oh, all right.
So secondhand shopping is another avenue. And then the third thing that I would highlight is upcycling. So you have a lot of designers, and particularly local designers, that are using old fabrics and turning them into something brand new. Right. So that's something that you can purchase. You can look for upcycling designers. We have an upcycling designer here in Tampa. Her business is called Sewn Apart. She makes bow ties. It's all
I've seen some of her bow ties in Disco Dolls. They're beautiful.
Exact. And they're very original. They're different. They're one of a kind. Yeah. Which is something that people are starting to appreciate more and more. They don't need to have the brand new hot thing that's in the window of the big store. It's much more rewarding to have something different and unique. And you can get that from upcycling fashion. And it's also something that you don't necessarily have to buy. You can take something out of your mom's old closet and upcycle it into something else.
And clothing swaps.
Oh my gosh.
Which are so much fun.
I love clothing swaps. It's like my face, like, so I've been doing clothing swaps for 10 years now. And it's really interesting whenever I get to meet people that are doing them for the first time still. And I can't even tell you like how many.
So for people who don't know, how would you describe a clothing swap?
So initially, the way that we had done them was you would gather all your friends together. Everybody brings a bag of clothes, at least one bag of clothes.
So they don't want anymore.
Yeah, so you basically shop, like get everything out of your closet that doesn't really serve you anymore. And you get together with your friends. If you are of adult age, you can add some wine into the mix, which also makes it very loud and sassy once people start throwing things
loud
around.
And sassy, that's my combo.
Yeah, and it's fun because then there's so many different body types that are trying on different types of clothes. And there's something really special about that element of clothing exchanges and clothing swaps and things like that. But then even more recently, there was a co-ed clothing exchange that was put on by Good Magazine, where you had brought a bag of clothes and they would count how many pieces you brought. They would give you the amount of tickets per the amount of pieces you brought, and then you could shop the whole, like, honestly, I think it was, if I'm not making it up, 18 racks of clothes between 200 people, and you could shop the girls' stuff, you could shop the guys' stuff, and then you just use the amount of tickets and get the amount of items.
So is the ticket more like an incentive for people to bring more and contribute more?
Yeah, because, the more you bring, the more you get to leave with. And
right.
So...
and then what do you do with the leftovers of a clothing swap? What's the best way to get rid of unwanted clothing that's the most environmentally and conscious? Friendly and conscious.
Well, it's interesting because we have done so many that each time there's been a different way of donating. So first, sometimes we'll look for a women's organization. Let's say it just so happens we have a lot of suits, and then we could partner with a specific organization. Or if there's a lot of t-shirts, then we could partner with a different organization. So we kind of look at whatever we have and whatever is asking or has a need for clothes, and then we could make a donation specific each time. And there's been so many different types of donations through the years.
Rachel, what would you say if I had a t-shirt that I loved, but it wasn't gonna, there's no mending, the fabric stretched out, things are faded. I really deemed Nobody Wants This beloved concert t-shirt from 1991. How would you recommend getting rid of that fabric?
Oh, that's interesting. I feel like I have a couple of those t-shirts that I still have not been able to part with. So one thing that I did that's a little outside of the box is I had a bunch of those old t-shirts made into a blanket. And that's something that I hold on to and I use in different occasions, but it didn't require that those t-shirts necessarily hold the same form or durability that they once needed when I wanted to wear them around. The other thing that I often do with clothing that has past its prime is I turn it into rags. And so I'm cleaning around the house with those items.
Gotcha.
So those are my two main aspects. I also have designer friends that are upcycling, and so I tend to hoard some of those old items and try to find a designer that can appreciate them. But I think just being really thoughtful about how those items can be used, and I think the cleaning materials is something that we hear a lot of. So Taryn, I don't know if you have other ideas of what you've done with some of your old items.
Well, there's a company called I Collect, and they have recycle bins for textiles in places like H&M and Zara and Levi's. And I'm actually going to share two parts of this conversation. So when donating, you can get a percentage off of your next purchase at those stores. I know people that just go there and donate their stuff and leave because they don't want to buy or purchase fast fashion. And so with the term fast fashion, it's usually a clothing item that is made to be broken within the first 5 to 10 wears. And whether that means that they have long stitch links on the side, which if you pop a couple of threads, you're going to have a hole in the side. Or if it's a less than good quality fabric, then it might get a hole in it anywhere. And so you're wanting to have better clothes. And so there is a statistic right now that the fast fashion sales are going down, secondhand fashion is going up, which is great because that means that people are focusing more on buying the secondhand clothes. But the recycle bins in the I Collect recycle bins, the clothes can be made into carpet padding or insulation. Rubber from shoes can be made into different things like athletic running, turf. I was trying to get the word. And even Nike has a reuse shoe program where they can break things down and use it for different types of athletic things. So there's different ways for things that they can be broken down and made into other items.
Well, this is all extremely fascinating, and just like all the other topics I ever talk about on this show, we're just not going to have enough time to talk about it as in depth as I'd like to. But in the last few minutes, I'd like to give you each an opportunity to maybe talk about or touch on something that we didn't have a chance to cover in the conversation, and then follow up with ways where people who do feel passionate about this or just want to learn more because there's so much to learn about, how they can follow up and educate themselves. And also, if you have any quick tips that we haven't talked about, how someone can be a more conscious consumer or, a more thoughtful purchaser when they're picking out or contributing or buying their fashion choices. So who wants to go first with that?
I'll go.
Okay. Taryn.
So the book that I had mentioned earlier, it's called How to Shop for Shift. You can find it on Amazon. It's on sale right now for $8.99. The other thing is for anybody that writes me at the labeyondthelabel.com website, I am gifting out free books, the digital version of the book. So, and I will be gifting one to both of you.
Aww,
so I wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
And then as far as the other things that we hadn't talked about, even at the Democratic Environmental Caucus meeting, when I was speaking, for me, I shared with people, if you're able to lead towards sustainable fabrics, if you're able to lean more towards natural fibers, blends are a little harder to make them into another fabric, but usually if it's like a natural fiber or a polyfiber, it's easier to make those into another fiber again. And then my favorite company to follow is called Circular Systems, and they have some recycled poly fabrics, they have recycled cotton fabrics, they have recycled food waste fabrics, and my inner nerd just gets so excited at the idea of like banana plants that would have been burned are being made into a fabric. Like those kinds of things make me really excited to know that they found something to do with that. So, yeah. And then transparency, like when you do have the means to be able to buy things, look for companies that are transparent and that share where they make their clothes and what fibers they have in it. And, you know, it could be where you get most of your clothes secondhand or through clothing swaps, and you save up for that one thing that has extra nerd value. Like I do it like maybe once or twice a year where there's just something that like I have to have. Like I'm looking forward to getting my Allbirds shoes really soon because they have a Tencel version of like an Allbirds shoe, and their claim to fame is they're the most comfortable shoe in the world. So
yeah, that you did nerd out there. Yeah. I'm really excited about that. And Rachel.
From my perspective, I think it's important to keep in mind that each one of us can make very small changes in our consumer habits, and all of those changes add up into significant shifts. So when it comes to some of these larger brands out there, whether it's Adidas or Nike or H&M, some of these hallmarks that we've all heard of, they are starting to integrate sustainable fashion into their company and into their products because there is demand from consumers, not necessarily because it's good for their bottom line.
Sure.
So if you can support the sustainable lines within those brands, I think that is always helpful in reiterating to those brands that consumers want transparency, we want sustainability. And the more that those big brands start to invest in those sort of materials and processes, the more prices start to reduce so that smaller brands can also afford to align with those same values and principles. And that increases variety and reduces price across the board for everyone. So if you can look at H&M's sustainable line, Adidas, and like I said, Nike, they also have sustainable materials that they're integrating. And then the second point I would highlight is look around locally if you can. I know we're all busy and it's really hard sometimes to find the time to do research on small pocket designers in your community. But there's some really interesting innovation happening here in Tampa. So you have several designers that are working solely with sustainable materials. You have a lot of designers here in Tampa that are looking at upcycling, as I mentioned before. And then you have different designers that are creating, I would say, completely new business models with a store called Valhalla that's in Seminole Heights, which is
I've seen that.
It's a consignment store, but it's also a subscription. So you pay, I want to say, approximately $30 or $40 a month. You get to rent out 3 items. As soon as you bring those 3 items back, you get 3 more items. It's an unlimited closet.
Is that off Hannah and Central?
I believe so. Okay. Yeah, right across the street from
the church.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's a model that you really haven't seen anywhere around the world, as far as I know. So being able to look around at what's available, I think is another avenue that we can all pursue here in Tampa, but of course, more broadly.
And now we didn't get to the movie, so unfortunately we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about it, but apparently there's a big movie that you both had mentioned that is a good introduction for people to really understand the impact. It sounds like similar to when I saw the Walmart movie, The High Price of Low Costs. Yeah. It was a real big eye-opener for me. And this movie sounds similar in that vein, but from a fashion perspective. What was the name of the movie again?
So the movie is called The True Cost. It's available on Netflix.
Okay.
And it really does walk you through what I think fashion insiders call the underbelly of the fashion industry. So talking about the supply chain, social justice, and environmental and health impacts of the industry and how we can all do a little bit better.
Awesome. So how do people connect with you, follow what you're doing, find these enclaves of small designers if they're interested? What's the best way to stay in contact and abreast of what you're doing, Taryn?
On Instagram, LA Beyond the Label, same with Facebook. Then LA Beyond the Label is the website. And to meet us in person, there's going to be an event in November called The Buzz. And I believe there's 5 of us that are part of the core Fashion Revolution Tampa Bay group. However, there's a small possibility I might be in Abu Dhabi, so that I might not be there. But if you want to get to meet the rest of the group, they will be there. And that's a great way to get to know what we're up to.
Do you have any other events coming up or any other thing that if people miss you because you're in Abu Dhabi, might have a chance to meet you at? Are you going to tour more caucuses?
I know I'll be going to the meetings. Let's see. That's the funny thing. Just literally today, we started putting together a calendar.
Oh.
So we're in the process of creating a calendar for ourselves. I believe there is a Facebook, Fashion Revolution Tampa Bay, so we should be updating it. We have a meeting that we're going to be scheduling next Thursday to talk about how we can get all of these events and activities out to more people. So yeah, let's put that in action. It will be on the Facebook page, Tampa Bay, or Fashion Revolution Tampa Bay.
Now you're committing.
I know.
Now it's motivation, you see?
It's out in the universe.
Is how it works. And what about you, Rachel?
Well, for Court Bottoms, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Court Bottoms. And you can also visit our website, www.courtbottoms.com. As Taryn said, you can find us on Facebook, Tampa Bay Fashion Revolution. We'll be posting all of our events. We'd love to talk to people about this stuff. So if anybody has questions, if you've discovered a hidden gem that we don't know about, please post it on our Facebook page. And yeah.
And are you doing more events at Disco Dolls? Because you were partnering with them on some stuff, right? Do you have any more events coming up with Disco Dolls?
We just had our second sewing chat where we taught those mending skills. I believe Disco Dolls is going to be trying to do that on a quarterly basis. There was such a high interest.
Okay.
So that's something. And then, as Taryn said, we're doing a couple panels this fall and a couple different events to talk about this issue more and more here in Tampa and St. Pete. So tune in to the Facebook page. Yeah.
And does Court Bottoms make plus size?
So Court Bottoms at this point goes up to large. However, as we say on our website, if there is a size that is not available and you are interested in our item, you can contact us directly and we will make it happen. We strive to be size inclusive.
Thank you.
Stepping stones. Yep.
All right. Well, I can say it has honestly been a pleasure to speak with both of you. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but that's generally how I feel when we introduce people to these topics in general. I'd love for you to come back and keep us up to date. And I wish you guys both the best of luck. And I appreciate both of you raising awareness, especially locally, about these issues and sharing the knowledge that you have with people to better our community. So thank you both. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode. Hopefully, this has started just the very beginning of a larger conversation that we need to have going forward. If you have any feedback regarding this or you'd like to know more, you can also reach out to me. My email address is jvaughn, V as in Victor, AUGHN as in Nancy, @gmail.com. Please make sure you like us on Facebook, that you go to reclaimingmymind.org to hear all of our interviews with local people as well as statewide people. And other than that, thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, ladies, for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having us.
And have a great day or night. Thank you.